there's a lot happening in Michigan. In spite of everything that's happening here in Michigan, we continue to make progress. We have not slowed down. We have not taken many days off, except for maybe a little bit of summer vacation. So recycling still is moving forward. I invited Matt Flechter here from Eagle. Many of you know him. He is the market development specialist there and really is our partner and leads the efforts at the state level on our behalf, I believe. And together, I think we make a good team, MRC membership, Eagle, in moving things forward. So I'm going to let Matt give us about a 7-minute overview of what's happening right now to give you some perspective about where we are. Matt?
Awesome. Hey, everybody. How am I looking in this logo? It's pretty crazy with the, like, awesome. Good. Yeah, thanks, Kieran, for the opportunity to talk to everybody. Back when we talked in May, we were deep in the conversations about toilet paper crisis and whether recycling is essential. And I'm happy to report to you that all of the work that you did to share your stories, to talk about the essential nature of the work that you all do, made it really clear that we do have a supply chain to protect, and those materials need to find their way into valuable uses. So good work, everyone, making your voice heard and telling those stories. Can I get the next slide? A lot of our work has been surrounding education and outreach. And luckily we have the recycling raccoons to help improve the quality of the material in your communities and at businesses. Won the National Campaign of the Year. We have, and our focus is pivoting into making sure we're talking about the health, safety, and welfare aspects of recycling and the work that you do. We're really proud of the partnerships that we've been able to form and continue to look for more. We've got our local campaigns in Marquette, Grand Rapids, Lansing, Bay City, and we'll be on the lookout for more of those. Next slide. Continuing with the theme of partnerships, we got partnerships with partnerships. We have 14 grant recipients, the Feet on the Street campaign, both drop-off and curbside recycling focused. And what's exciting about this is we're using real on-the-ground data for drop-off and curbside using waste sorts to improve the effectiveness and the cost effectiveness of education efforts. Make sure you check out the new social media kit, and this is being developed because of some of the work that we are doing in Michigan specific to drop-offs. And we've heard you, the challenges of managing drop-off contamination are different than those at curbside. So having that drop-off social media kit will be good. Take a look at that. You'll have all these links. We'll share this presentation and we can get them out to you. We will have a second round of Eagle TRP grants, so be on the lookout for that. And we are so excited. One of my favorite things is to see legislators and local officials up there talking about recycling programs, how it's important to the jobs in their community. And we've gotten some really great press and continue to look for more and get with us to be able to tell your story in your community. Next slide. Megadata. Part 115, as we expect, will be moving through the legislature this year, and we are getting ready. And part of that getting ready is making sure that we have data to support the local materials management planning process. So be on the lookout for these surveys. You may have been contacted already. We're looking at facilities and municipalities, gathering up data, sharing what the current state of recycling is in the communities, so we can begin to look at those opportunities in the future. Next slide. Next cycle. Some of you have heard this. We've launched last week. What this is a platform to support the development of businesses and programs at the local level and connecting them with funding. So I'm really excited about this part of it because one of the things that we recognize in our market development and infrastructure grants is not everybody's ready for funding and may need some support, some technical support in telling their story, getting their business plan, and most importantly, fundraising. So providing that technical knowledge and support to those programs and businesses is what Next Cycle will do. And it creates opportunities for partnership and innovation. We know that we can't fund programs only on the backs of state government and local government funding. So bringing additional funding partners to the table is what Next Cycle is all about. Next slide. So we have 32 communities and businesses funded in the 2019 grants. 2020, we are nearing announcement of the 46 communities and businesses that will be receiving funding through the market development and infrastructure grants. I talked to the recycling specialists this morning and asked them for their favorite projects out of the 32 communities and businesses. And we heard Detroit, the Bay City Comprehensive Drop-Off Program, and then also making sure that we're working to grow that processing infrastructure through Marquette and Lansing, Western Washtenaw, and Ann Arbor. So a lot of really good stories there. Next slide. So watch for these things coming down at you. The 2021 Recycling Infrastructure RFP will be out this year. We're putting an additional focus on training support, especially on that health, safety, and welfare story that we've heard is so important in COVID. Connecting recycling with climate and equity, making sure that we're telling the story of how the work that you do supports strong communities and a cool climate. And quality improvement and local education opportunities will continue, as I already mentioned. And of course, the work from the funding opportunities through Next Cycle. Tomorrow at 11, there's a presentation to learn more about that. So there you have it. Ran through the highlights. And if you have any questions about anything that I mentioned, just send me a quick chat. I could probably respond right now as we're going through the rest of the program. So thanks, Karen.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I very much appreciate your willingness to share with us kind of everything that's going on. I want to reassure people that in spite of the slowdown and the budget challenges that the state has been facing, our work on recycling continues, and you're our guy to carry it through. Your staff has been great, and we look forward to continued funding and hopefully progress on Part 115 changes later this year. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you, Karen.
All right, moving on here. We are lucky to have some very good supporters. Eagle is one of those financial supporters of the Michigan Recycling Coalition, as is Pratt Recycling. So I've invited Paul England, Senior VP of Pratt Recycling in the Midwest region, to really talk with us a little bit about what's happening with Pratt and what he needs from all of you. Paul, are you on with us?
I am. Good morning, everyone.
Take it away.
Matt, two things. Number one, my backdrop is a hotel room in Indianapolis, not as cool as yours. And also, it's great to hear that recycling is alive and well in the state of Michigan. Look, I want to congratulate everybody with the MRC for just another exciting, very thought-provoking event. Every year that I've been a part of Pratt, now 7 years, and partnering with the MRC and Karen, I just get more and more excited and a little goosebumpy every time that this event comes around. And Karen, thank you, number one, for allowing Pratt to be a part of this amazing organization. We're proud to partner with the MRC, and you have our ongoing commitment for a very long and very rewarding relationship. I want to give you a brief update on Pratt. You know, we were also deemed essential as a part of this. We make boxes, that's what we do. And as a part of making boxes, we deliver medicines and masks, and I'm all masked up today, respirators and food all across the country. We have been and continue to be extraordinarily busy. In fact, setting records on our business in 2020. So we're excited about that. But the heart of Pratt Industries has been and always will be sustainability. It's a part of our DNA. It's embedded in everything that we do. And then therefore, the work that we do across the country, and especially in the Midwest, and especially in the state of Michigan, is highly focused on sustainability. Our 5 paper mills, the 2 most recent mills, one in Wapakoneta, always tongue-in-cheek say a suburb of Michigan, and then also Valparaiso, Indiana. Those two mills alone consume over 1 million tons a year of recovered paper. And I will tell you that we get thousands and thousands and thousands of tons every month from the state of Michigan. So Michigan is very, very important to us. And that's why we continue to support the great work that you guys are doing. Talk quickly about growth. Pratt announced a few years ago that our goal is to double the size of our company. And that's also a very big deal. So it doesn't mean we're going to have 10 paper mills, but we're going to be doubling the size of our company as far as the amount of boxes we make, because again, that's what we do. But along with doubling the amount of boxes we make and sell, it's going to pull through the rest of our integrated supply chain. So we will have more paper mills. Number 6, number 7, not too long down the road. And those mills consume about 500,000 tons a year of paper. So the ongoing demand and consumption of paper, good, clean, recovered paper across the Midwest, again, continues to be something very important to us. We need more paper, and therefore the work that we're doing with the MRC and all the state associations across the Midwest. I'll end with an update. A year ago, I mentioned that Pratt is trying to be very forward thinking in how we approach supporting the various states, and in this case, Michigan. We announced the launching of a rural recycling project in Southwest Michigan. I do want to report that it's up and running. It's going far better than expected. We've partnered with Broken Arrow Recycling. We've partnered with Padnos. We've partnered with the state of Michigan. And the good news is that we've provided a collection methodology for the rural residents of Southwest Michigan. You're dropping off cardboard, you're dropping off mixed paper, and we're consuming it, and we're excited about that. And again, congratulations. Good luck on a tremendous event this week, and we look forward to many, many more years to come.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate your commitment, not only to the Michigan Recycling Coalition in Michigan and what we're doing, but to really making recycling work, to turning, you know, our mixed paper and our cardboard into new products, because that's really where it's all at. So thank you for your commitment. And I know you've got to leave to talk to the Indiana legislature later today. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so the reason I'm in a hotel room in Indianapolis, which is the first time I've been out of my home office in a few months, is that like Michigan, the state of Indiana is also very forward thinking. And I'll be testifying on behalf of recycling, not only in the state, but across the Midwest today at the Senate building here in Indianapolis. So looking forward to that.
That's great. Thanks for that. And I'll let everybody know that Steve Kent, who is also with Pratt, working Michigan contacts and clients, he's also on the board of directors, but he'll be with us today. And if you have any questions about what Pratt does, need to talk with anybody about how to engage with Pratt in a new way or in an enhanced way, you can privately chat with Steve at any time to get that data and information. And he'll also be staffing Pratt's exhibit table in the exhibit hall later today. So thanks a lot, both of you guys. Okay, moving along now, I'll just say that we're really excited to have Adam Minter here with us today. You'll hear from him in just a minute. He is a journalist with Bloomberg and the author of The Junkyard Planet, Travels in the Billion-Dollar Trash Trade, and most recently, Secondhand, Travels in the new global garbage sale. And so I think his work really very well meshes with our work, and I'm really excited to hear from him today. I want to shout out, especially when I talked with some Goodwill representatives, Nick Carlson, who's also on our board of directors, about their interest in sponsoring Adam. They saw an easy partnership with Adam's work already in the work that Goodwill does. So just a shout out to say thank you to Goodwill Industries of Grand Rapids and Goodwill Industries of Greater Detroit Green Works for their sponsorship of Adam today. If you haven't read his books yet, they're provocative, they're interesting, they provide a really kind of different picture of recycling and innovation that happens with recycling. And without further ado, I will like to introduce Adam Minter, who is right in the middle of my screen, but I'm sure he'll pop up when he starts to speak. Adam, thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you for inviting me. You know, we've been talking about this, I think, since late last year. Usually I'm based in Malaysia. I've been in Asia for 18 years, but because of the pandemic, we temporarily were relocated to Minnesota. We thought, you know, for a few weeks, and now it's the beginning of October. And here we are giving this keynote from Minnesota. Who would have thought when we started talking about this, Karen, that that would be the case? Well, anyway, I've got a big slide deck I want to share with you today, but I just want to thank Karen for inviting me, the sponsors. Goodwill is very special to me. If you've read my books, you know that. I just think the world of them. And I think the world of state recycling organizations. They're very important to me. As I told Karen when we first talked about me coming to see you guys and do this in person, I said, I love talking to the state recycling organizations because you're the most devoted, most interesting, most committed people in the industry, and not just industry, but the nonprofit world. And I'm always so jazzed, if I can use that term, to hear what y'all have to say about recycling, because I learn as much from you, hopefully so much more than you may learn from my silly slides that I'm going to show you, you know, in the course of this presentation. So I'm going to sort of take you on a global journey today. And one of the things I want to really emphasize, and I've been thinking about for years, is that, you know, we all want this idea of a circular economy. And one of the things I like to impress upon people is, to some extent, we already have one. And I think we can learn from the one that we have. It's just not in the place we would ordinarily think of it. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully this works. And here we are as... Okay, well, that was not the, I gotta jump back. Okay, here we are, the first slide. I tell you, Zoom. All right, how we think about waste in need of repair. So I want to start you out in China, because it's kind of one of the places where I started out. This was a picture that I took in 2002 at a junkyard in southern China in Guangdong. I got a call from a friend of mine who owned this scrapyard, and he said, hey, I heard you're in town, because a lot of these big owners, they know what's going on in town. He says, you want to see my new scrapyard? I said, sure, I love scrapyards. I grew up in a scrapyard in Minneapolis. And so he brought me down and he asked me if I knew what that was. I said, I don't. He says, that's a pile of 3 helicopters that were shredded in Los Angeles. I said, cool, what else do you have? So he took me around and we came to this. And from a distance, I thought we were looking at extension cords. But as we got closer, and I'm sure some people on this conference know what that is, those were Christmas tree lights, a big pile of Christmas tree lights. Now, I have spent my life around scrapyards. As I said, I grew up in one. I come from a 3rd generation scrap recycling family. And for whatever reason, we had never done Christmas tree lights. And so I was knocked out. And at that point, I was working as a journalist. And in the back of my mind, I thought, I'm going to write a book about recycling one day. And I just need to find that thing that's going to really give it that oomph to take it past the recycling professionals into the general public. And it hit me. Christmas tree light recycling, that's going to be the beginning of my book. Well, easier said than done. So I said to Joe, who owns this yard, can you show me how this is done? He says, no time today. We got to go to dinner. He says, but next time you're down here, I'll let you know. Well, next time didn't happen, but I did happen to know this gentleman. He's a friend of mine by the name of Johnson Zeng. And throughout the 2000s and into the last decade, he spent 6 months out of the year driving around the United States buying scrap from small scrapyards, big scrapyards. I bet there's people on this call who know Johnson. And Johnson also bought Christmas tree lights. And I knew of that about him. So I called him up and I said, Johnson, can I go traveling with you and see how you buy Christmas tree lights and then where they go in China? And he says, sure. So this is Johnson in Ohio, and he takes me around for a week all over the United States. We're driving around scrapyard to scrapyard. Here's some Christmas tree lights in Indiana. Here are some Christmas tree lights in Ohio. And here are some Christmas tree lights in North Carolina. And after a week of this, I said to Johnson, okay, I got it. There's a lot of Christmas tree lights out there. Where are they going in China? Can you hook me up? And he says, okay. I'll set you up. Next time you go back to China, and I was living in Shanghai at that time. I lived there for 12 years. He said, you call my friend Raymond. He's in southern China, and he will hook you up with his Christmas tree light recycling factory. I said, cool, that's what I'm going to do. So I got back to China. I called Raymond. He said, come down. He's in Qingyuan, which is a major copper manufacturing center in southern China, and I'll hook you up. So if anybody's ever traveled to China, you know you can't just go see the factory. You have to go to dinner with everybody. And so that's what we did. And this is Raymond's family and a couple of his friends, most of whom work in and around his facility. And Raymond's kind of a shy guy. He's the one guy who purposely leaned out of the photo. If you see two legs there in tan khakis, those are Raymond's legs. That's as close as you're going to get to him today. But Raymond, you know, after eating with me and drinking a little bit with me, they decided, you're cool. You can come and see our Christmas tree light recycling facility. So great. So before we see the Christmas tree light recycling facility, I just want to show you a picture here, a chart. I'm not going to show you too many charts today. I hope you can see the right side of that. But this is U.S. exports of all scrap commodities to China. This comes from Joe Pickard at ISRI, who is a tremendous economist of the industry. And one of the things to keep in mind about this is, you know, we've talked about the decline, you know, and how hard it is out there for recyclers these days. And it's important to remember things started getting hard not in 2018 when China shut things off. They started getting hard after 2011 when things peaked. And you know, I think it was easy to overlook that, but I think most of the folks who are listening today know that some of those markets started disappearing. But at the time I took this video, which was 9 years ago in 2011, the peak of it, China couldn't get enough of our stuff because they wanted to make more stuff out of it. And just a reminder, some of you might remember this article, 2015. This was a legendary article that, you know, 3 years before China did its restrictions, said, you know, we've got problems in the industry. But we weren't really talking about it that much at that point. All right, so let's look at what things looked like during the boom time. I'm going to show you how Christmas tree lights were recycled in China for many years. And one thing to keep in mind, this wasn't the only facility like this. In this town outside of Qingyuan, it's a little suburb, there were 10 of these facilities, and they would recycle millions of pounds of Christmas tree lights a year. It was probably the world's leading facility for recycling Christmas tree lights, and they all did it something like this. I don't know if you can hear the sound on here, it's just grinding, but what you do is you cut up the Christmas tree lights, throw them in that grinder. That's not smoke, that's steam. You've got water going in there to cool that down because they're spinning blades. And if you didn't have water, that whole thing would explode. And out comes this goop of water, plastic, copper, glass, which is shoveled onto these tables, which are tilted upwards. And it's like panning for gold. You have water shooting across the top, and the plastic and the glass, which is very light, goes off one side. And then the copper, which is heavier, you can see that streak of copper there, it goes off on the other. And you're going to see her shovel out some of that copper in just a moment. Now, the thing about this is this system took, according to Raymond, about a year to calibrate. You got to tilt it just right, got to get that water flowing through there just right. The question I always get about it is what happens to that water? It's great. It circulates through the system over and over and over, so it's not discharged into the any open bodies of water into the ground. But you can see you've got pretty clean copper right there. Now, the other great thing about this, before they invented this system, they had another system, and it went like this. You take a pile of Christmas tree lights, throw a bunch of gasoline on it, toss a match on, and then in the morning you have clean copper with some char on it. This is obviously much better. If you ask what happens to that copper and the plastic, the copper is recycled into, brace yourself, more Christmas tree lights. That's the #1 market. So round and round it goes. There's your circular economy. The insulation, when plastics were hot, and people keep telling me plastics aren't recyclable, and I keep saying, no, that's not true. It's just, you know, it's a matter of how you want to do it and what your tolerances are for safety and environmental issues. But those plastics were typically recycled into slipper soles. So you might be walking on, you know, 2010's Christmas tree lights, if you're not lucky, because that may have some high lead content in it. So it's not all rosy, but again, it gives you some idea of what's possible. And here's just another part of the factory, and you can just see that gravity and how that's working. The heavier stuff goes in one direction, the lighter stuff goes in the other. So that takes us to 2018. Now you can see things were falling off even more steeply. This is still before the restrictions on China. And again, I've preached this in other talks I've given in articles, is it's very easy to kind of blame China and its restrictions for the troubles we're having. But clearly, as an industry, those problems started long before then. They really started accelerating at the end of the last decade. Why? And this is the really big question. And it's something that I think the industry needs to reckon with a little bit more. Number one, China was your biggest market outside of North America. And this is something that started happening. The population started getting older. And in fact, China's working age population actually peaked in 2013. So from that point on, it didn't have as much of the low-cost labor that was so necessary to manufacture the products that were made from your recyclables. And you can see what happened as early as, the 2 decades ago, things started ticking upward. But where it kind of hit the tipping point was really around 2013. Again, it became less and less competitive for China to be recycling the stuff that you send over. And then, of course, you can see Chinese economic growth over the last 10 years, and it really started cratering. And that, more than anything, and that's all a function of various factors, including the fact there's only so many subway lines you can build after a certain point where it just doesn't work anymore. But you throw in the wage issues and the labor issues, and you're going to get slow growth, and you're going to get less demand for raw materials, less demand for recycling. And then you throw all of that at this. And we all know this is good news, but it's true. We are throwing away more and generating more recycling. So if you look at this not from a recycling standpoint, but say you're an oil driller, you're Exxon, and the price of oil is declining, the thing you don't do is start drilling for more oil. But there's more to the recycling industry than just raw materials. We do it for a lot of different reasons. But we sort of threw this into that buzzsaw of declining Chinese demand. And again, there we have it. That's kind of a problem. So I've been thinking about this problem for a few years now. What do we do to fix this? And, it's not that I'm against more recycling. I'm a child of the industry. My career is about the industry. So I'm all for more recycling. But I also think, we're running into a buzzsaw that isn't easily fixed, even with more domestic production and recycling mandates. So, and I'm saying this in all seriousness. When I get stuck, I look basically back to history and my favorite movies, and I look to Star Wars. And, I know that may sound a little odd, but just hang with me for a moment here, especially the Star Wars fans. This is all going to make a lot of sense in just a couple minutes. The great thing about the Star Wars movies is they're filled with junkyards, right? If you watch them, think about it. Every single film has junk in them. So here's episode 1, or depending on how you want it, episode 4. But this is the first of the prequels. And here we have a junkyard. And the funny thing is there's a lot of junk there, but there's no recycling, right? There's never any recycling in Star Wars. Episode 4, the original Star Wars, the Jawas. They are sort of great recyclers, scavengers with their junk truck. They remind me of my immigrant Jewish forebears who, were wandering around Minneapolis with a junk truck. The Jawas, my immigrant forebears were probably about as tall as the Jawas as well, to be honest with you. And there they are. They're picking up R2-D2. Looks like a big hunk of metal junk. Inside the truck, there's no recycling. There's no prepping this. There's no... that's just the stuff's just sitting around. What's the deal? And I thought about this a lot for many years. All right, my favorite example, Empire Strikes Back, Star Destroyer. Now, you may remember this scene. I hope you do. The Han Solo is in the Millennium Falcon with the good guys, and they're on the back of that Star Destroyer, and they say the Star Destroyer is about to go into hyperspace. And before a Star Destroyer goes into hyperspace, what it does is it dumps its trash. So now, take a look at the trash. That's metal. That's steel. Why would you dump good steel into outer space? It makes no sense, So that really bugged me. So let's go now, jump ahead to episode 7. All right, Star Destroyer crashed on Jakku. Now, if you know anything about recycling, there should be a bunch of scavengers tearing that thing apart, taking it, over to Louis' Jakku junkyard. But in fact, there's nobody there. All there is that big hunk of steel until Rey comes along. So Rey is my favorite character in the entire Star Wars series. She's the ultimate junk woman, if you will. And what does she do? I'm not going to go through all the pictures, but she goes in there. She doesn't take a torch to cut pieces of steel off the walls. She goes in there and she takes the really expensive bits, the reusables. And what does she do? She takes them to this dude, you know, the Louis of Jakku, if you will, and she sells them, these tiny parts, out of this giant Star Destroyer for portions, for food. Why? What is that stuff? Well, it's the value add. She's not selling it for steel. It's because this guy sells it to people who need to reuse it. All right, what's going on the Star Wars universe? I really looked for this for a long time. Episode 3. The problem is, here you have, this is the big fight scene in Episode 3 on the volcano planet of Mustafar. And what do they do on Mustafar? They mine steel. It's one giant volcano. So basically metal is free. There's no price. Everything has crashed. If you need steel, you go there, you take a big scoop out, you refine it, you're done. So there's no point in recycling the metal. If you're going to recycle, if you're going to do something, you need a value add. And so that's why, you know, Chewbacca, who's awesome, he's not melting down C-3PO. He's fixing him because it's the value add. He's learned how to do this. That's where the money is. Han Solo knows how to fix anything, right? He could, you know, including his ship. And of course, Rey, she knows how to bypass the compressor. And that was my, that was the background on my phone for a long time until my wife made me change it finally. So again, it's fun, and Star Wars is fun, but there's a serious point here, and that is at a time when you have, you know, depressed commodity prices in the Star Wars universe, it's a permanent state of affairs. You do look for the value adds, and you do look for ways, if you want to continue that circular economy, you do look for the ways to value add. So I started looking around 2014, after I published my first book, for ways, and I wasn't really sure how I was going to do this, but I was thinking about it, ways that the value add can be added in. And that led me to this gentleman. This is a friend of mine, and there's a very young picture of him. This was taken in 2001. I confirmed that with him, fact-checked it this morning. This is Robin Ingenthron, and he's the owner of Good Point Recycling in Vermont. He's in Middlebury, Vermont. And he started out, he was actually the first recycling coordinator for the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. He eventually left Mass DEP and started his own business up in Middlebury when his wife became a professor of French up there. And so here he is with a big pile of CRTs that are about to be, brace yourselves, shipped to China. Now, when I say ship CRTs to China, y'all are thinking 60 Minutes, piles of burning CRTs. I'm here to tell you that that was not exactly accurate. I'm not going to do a deconstruction of the 60 Minutes episode, but if you do go watch it, actually watch it carefully for evidence of CRTs in that 60 Minutes episode. There were none. It was a very flawed episode. So Robin was shipping CRTs to a buyer in Los Angeles who was buying 5,000 CRTs a day across the United States and shipping them to factories in southern China where those CRTs were taken apart and refurbished in very clean factories and then cased, boxed, and sent back to the United States as color monitors. And this was a massive business throughout the 2000s before China actually, not the United States, but China cracked down on it because the Chinese military was deeply involved in making new CRTs and they didn't appreciate the competition. But it was a circular economy. And I got to know Robin and he told me these stories and he shared these pictures with me, which was very kind of him. So, you know, the question was, what happens then to your monitors if you can't ship them anymore to China to be made into new monitors? And he started having to recycle them like everybody else. But it had always stuck in his mind that there should be somewhere for this stuff to go where it can be reused. I'm going to stop with Robin for a second and then show you what happens to the other stuff. Now, whenever I talk about Robin and monitors, people say, well, right, but what happens to the stuff that can't be reused? What happens to the full units? So I'm not going to show you what happens to CRTs, but I'm going to show you what happens to some phones, because China is the largest importer and generator of phones and secondhand phones in the world. These pictures were taken in 2013, and you can see what these are. These are manufacturing leftovers from a Samsung factory in southern China. This is Guiyu, which is the very place that 60 Minutes profiled in its very famous episode. Now, if you have a bunch of the same motherboard from a phone, that means that you have hundreds, if not thousands, of the same chips. And that's worth money. You don't want to set this on fire. You want to set up a factory to take all those identical chips, pick them apart, and then do this. And then you have all these chips. And what can you do with these chips?
Yeah.
You can then take them to the Guiyu
Kind of
reuse
a
market.
ballpark, based on.
Oh, I just had a voice come in. And then you can sell them in a market. And Guiyu was very close to the world's largest toy making. It's still close to the world's largest toy making center in Shantou. And so you have toy buyers, toy makers from all over China come in and buy those chips, because you don't need a high performance chip if you're going to have like a talking book, you know, that says, it tells you the story of Goldilocks. And that's where that stuff went, and it was pulled out. And that same thing goes for some of the newer televisions. Maybe the television itself isn't reusable, but the parts are. And there are markets, and they're not just grimy markets. There's markets like these, and you can see, and then there's this also in Shenzhen. You can see these are iPhone parts that have been recovered, and what happens with them? They're resold, cleaned up, resold as new, along with monitors. And then they can be sold to anybody who wants to repair iPhones in Shenzhen, and they repair a lot of iPhones. And you can, if you want to actually, and it's been done, this is a great YouTube video, take a screen grab or write this down, how I made my own iPhone in China. People can go into, there's enough parts in these markets where you can actually build your own iPhone from the parts that are recovered from imported phones and those generated in China. There's your circular economy. All right, so all fine and good. Let's go back to Robin. All right, so this is Robin's warehouse in Vermont, Middlebury, Vermont. You can see a bunch of CRTs there. You can see there's some other stuff there. And Robin has, like many of the people who recycle CRTs, a lot of these just get sent to recyclers in Spain and in other places, certified recyclers. But he also sends, and brace yourself, he also sends CRTs to Ghana. That's right. So it's almost as if Robin wants to, mark up environmental sins. First he sent them to China, now he's sending them to West Africa. When I say send CRTs to Ghana, you're probably thinking of this. This is a place in the center of Accra, which is the capital of Ghana, called Agbogbloshie. Some people have incorrectly labeled it the world's largest e-waste dumping site. If anybody knows anything about e-waste plants, this is not very big. It's not the world's largest anything, except maybe the most popular place in Ghana for news photographers to come and photograph. What happens here is stuff that's been used for decades in Ghana, then it is burnt and recycled, but these are not imported items. So I got to Agbogbloshie with Robin. And here he is. And I actually had an email from him this morning. And the first thing he wanted you to know about this photo is that he's lost 40 pounds since it was taken. So, for the record. Anyway, there he is in Agbogbloshie. He's getting a tour from the guy on the right, whose name is Olu Orga. And Olu started out as somebody who worked in Agbogbloshie, which is this large dump in Ghana. And what Olu learned was how to collect the parts from electronics that had been tossed out by people in Ghana. And over time, he got to know electronics, and he became somebody who worked in the import industry. And so here is Olu. This is a photo of that Olu posted to his WhatsApp to people in his hometown in Tamale saying, I just imported a bunch of monitors from Vermont. Come and buy them. Because Ghana, as a point, it's at this point, especially northern Ghana, Tamale, which is where he is from, it's not a very economically robust place right now. Incomes are quite low. It's going up rapidly, but they not only can't really afford new, but they don't want it, because there is a perception in Ghana that secondhand stuff, because it's been massively pre-tested in the United States, used for years and years, it's much less likely to break down than something straight out of the box that's been shipped from a manufacturer in East Asia. And so here he's pointing to a few desktops, and these desktops, there's no market for them in the United States. They would go directly to a recycler. But there are people who will use them and continue to use them and love them in Ghana. So Olu is happy to have them. This is Olu's hometown, Tamale. It is the third largest city in Ghana. It's the capital of the northern region. That's the province up north. It's a really interesting place. You can see the minarets of the mosque in the background. And one of his partners there, his main partner, is along this. This is the main street, and this is inside the shop. And there you can see all of the computers, and Kamil, who's the guy in the yellow, he's Kamil Chindiva, he's the owner. He's filling out a receipt or something there. He has just sold some computers, and he's going to sell some more. And who does he sell them to? He sells them to people, with kids who need a computer for school. He sells them to the local hospital. He sells them to the local bank, all secondhand. It's the secondhand economy. Nobody's buying these things from Vermont to set them on fire. There's real value here. Let's go down to the capital, Accra. And this is another shop that one of Olu's partners, a guy by the name of Wahab Mohammed. And if you've read Secondhand, you know about Wahab. I spent a bit of time profiling him. This is one of his customers. He buys from Robin as well, called Bougie Computers. It's a great computer shop. It's actually located just off the main street in Accra. And here's a peek inside the repair shop. Now, you see all those laptops there. None of those are going to be sold anymore as new laptops. What they are laptops that have either been returned, mostly returned, or they have been brought in and they're broken, and the shop bought them back. And it's not just putting them up there as decoration for the repair shop. What they use them for is parts. And so say somebody brings in an old Dell and the monitor is broken. Well, at Bougie Computers, they can't call up Dell and say, can you send us a new monitor? First of all, it's too expensive. Second, I mean, the logistics at the time, and it'd just take too long. So what do? You've got this storehouse of old computers, and that's basically your parts inventory, and you put it together there. All right, let's go to one more place in Ghana. This is a wonderful gentleman by the name of Ibrahim Al-Hassan. He is the master television repairman of Savalugu, Ghana. So we go to Tamale, which is the capital of the northern region, and then you take about a 30-minute drive north of there, and you have this gentleman. And he can repair anything, and that's right, he's holding a CRT, because CRTs are still in circulation there. And you can find 30 and 35-year-old CRTs being used and repaired throughout Savalugu, and he knows how to fix them. So take note of the one in the background there. He's holding, I'm not sure what that is, but the one that he's working on is an old Sony Trinitron that's been in Ghana for 3 decades. It's gone through multiple owners and has gone from the capital all the way up to where he is. A person brought it in, it's not working. And Ibrahim said, okay, I'll fix it for you. But, since it's a manual, so it's actually a TV that you would actually, remember that when you would actually change channels manually on the TV? He says, look, let me do you a favor. Let me install a remote control on this thing so you don't need to get out of your easy chair anymore. And that's what he did. And that's not a trivial repair. If it's even a repair, it's an add-on, but he's capable of doing that, and he's so good, his neighbors will hang out and watch him work his magic. He's awesome. The cost of that repair is about $5 plus parts. So it gives you an idea of what the potential is there and who's using the stuff. Again, why would you import this to set it on fire when he's actually in need of the parts? And parts is what it's all about. This is another repair shop this one's also in Tamale. And you can see everybody who has a repair shop has a bunch of old TVs sitting around that they cannibalize. And you can see, just going back to Ibrahim, you can see he has a whole shed of them. He needs a part, he goes in there, he pulls it out. All right. So let's go back to Good Point Recycling, back to where we kind of started with this long tangent. This is now what Robin does. He certainly will sell older TVs. They will go to recyclers. But in the last 2 years, he has set up his own parts disassembly shop. And what he will do is he'll take those old TVs and he'll have his staff, they've been trained to literally take them apart. And as they take them apart, they take pictures of them. And they post the pictures to eBay. And he has publicly said this. He's gone from making, less than $1,000 a month off this. In the last couple of years, he's now making more than $50,000 a month, selling parts on eBay alone, which is pretty impressive when you think about it. And he's doing this based upon what he learned, not by going to, some sustainable summit somewhere in Europe. He learned this by going to Ghana and going to China. And there's a lesson there is that, I think there's sort of there's sort of this presumption that we know how to do sustainability best here in the United States. But in fact, in many ways, the people who know how to do sustainability best are those in emerging markets who have done it, not maybe out of an environmental consciousness, but because of economic need. And Robin has now taken that model from places like Ghana and from China, and he's now making a very good side business out of doing it. Now, the stuff he posts on eBay is sold all over the world. Primarily North America to television repair people here. But his ambition has been, look, you go around Ghana and you see they need parts and they're not going to order off eBay, and the logistics are very hard there and there's a lot of theft in logistics. You know, so what he has done is he started working with this gentleman, and you should, you know, if you, this is not to sell the book, but Wahab Muhammad, the guy on the left, is in my book. He's a wonderful, very interesting guy who's a US Ghanaian citizen, Ghanaian US citizen, however you prefer it. And he goes back and forth, not during the pandemic, between Ghana and the United States, and buys whole units. And with Robin, and this is a picture of Wahab right as he's about to head out to Ghana again, started buying parts so that he can bring them to the television repairmen. And I should say, when I say repairmen, I really mean repairmen. Ghana is what Ghana is, and the people who do repair business there are all men. It's apprenticeships, and it's just the nature of how things are done in Ghana. So I don't mean any gender disrespect at all, but he's taking these parts back, and I happened to be in the warehouse when he did that. And then here's a picture of Wahab back in Tamale. And obviously this was not taken by me. This was taken with a screen cam as Robin was talking to Wahab. And Robin is standing next to a very lovely guy by the name of Owudu Pan, who is, many people believe, the master television repairman of Ghana. He's based in a place called Kumasi, which has some of the world's most skilled electronics repair people. And he's one of the founders of the repair union, actually, in Kumasi. And so Wahab is basically briefing him on the kinds of parts that Robin is now preparing to start sending into Ghana. It's a very modest start to a business, but again, it's the circular economy we all want. And, you know, as we look for hope in a very difficult situation for anybody who's in this industry, you know, this is just one example. It's electronics, it's not paper, it's not plastic, but I think it gives us some sense, some model, I hope, some ways at least to start thinking about how we find more use, more markets, more sustainability, more circularity at a time when we feel like many of us who are in this industry feel like we're really running into a wall. And so I'm always very excited to share these images and these stories, what Robin has done, but really what Robin would be the first to tell you what he's learned from Wahab and Olu and Owudu and the folks in China in the early 2000s. For me, Robin really stands as kind of, he's sort of the Ray for me of sort of Vermont, if you will. And so on that, and I think that's the first time I've ever called Robin the Ray of Vermont. So I'll have to let him know I dropped that. But at that, I think I'll wrap up, and I'm really excited to hear any questions and discussion and anything else. So I think I should stop sharing my screen, and hopefully you can see me.
I think we can see you, Adam. Thank you. You know what, honestly, that was fantastic, and I think I could listen to your stories all day. So if you do have some more to pull out as we go along, please do so, because we do have some time to do that. But I've got a few questions to I think get us started, and I'll let the audience know that please put your questions in the chat box as we go along. Let's Adam here to share more of his great stories. You know, I was a little bit taken back by the story about how, you know, some secondhand economy markets in China were circumvented because they undermined, you know, whatever, the government or politics. And could you say more about how we work around the current system to really put policies or you know, what do we need to do to get past that and develop this kind of secondhand economy?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's not just China that's done that. I mean, you know, it happens all over the world where you have powerful industries that look upon secondhand as unnecessary and unwanted competition. You see it also very commonly, and this is becoming a big subject, with textiles and apparel. In India, you have a full ban on the import of secondhand clothing, though it does get in, you know, because more than a decade ago, the cotton manufacturers and the wool manufacturers said, hey, we don't want this. And they will argue that with textiles, at least, and you see this argument all the time, oh, it's unsanitary, it brings in disease. And of course, that's ridiculous. It doesn't, but it's a way that you've seen East African countries do it. India has done it. You know, Mexico has a full-on ban on the import of secondhand goods, though of course they flow in huge numbers in. And so it's a combination of things. And I think it's something that the industry is going to have to struggle against for a while. But I also think, just in my experience, if we get past COVID, there's increasing recognition around the world that these kinds of goods don't actually compete with new, that they are entry points into the consumer economy. And we're starting to see that happen in East Africa, where you know, they put a ban on secondhand clothes, and yet people are smuggling it in recent years. And so the governments there are saying, wait a second, we can't take this away. And the fact that it's being smuggled in isn't taking away anything from our new industries. You know, with China, there's been an interesting evolution recently in terms of recycling. And that is, and I did a column on this recently for Bloomberg, is China has finally gotten away from actually labeling the imports of recyclables as waste. And that's a huge, huge step, because people have been lobbying the Chinese government unsuccessfully for almost 2 decades to just get the nomenclature changed. Because if you can change the nomenclature away from calling stuff waste, you actually have an entry point, and they're starting to call it raw materials. And that was the result of many, many years of work. Now, does it mean that, you know, all of, you know, the same kinds of stuff that we were sending over before, exporting over before, are going to go? No, but it does at least provide an opening to be able to discuss this stuff as raw materials and not as waste. And I think that's a really important lesson to the industry, you know, to also sort of change, you know, the nomenclature and get around to talking about this stuff as raw materials. I don't think we do that enough. I've almost, you know, when I've done advocacy, I've tried to get away from referring to it as recyclables, because I think that's a loaded term in many ways as well. You know, in my opinion, the recycling industry is a raw material industry. It's a sustainable raw material industry. And I think making those kinds of arguments to governments really carries more weight. Oops, Karen, I can't hear you. Karen, oh, there we are. There
yeah, sorry about that. So those are great examples. You answered like a few of my questions that I had already started forming with your answer, so thanks for that. But has the Chinese government put restrictions in place to prevent the burning of plastics or the littering of plastics on fields?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. One of the reasons why the Christmas tree lights recycling system that you saw in the video was implemented was air quality issues. Now, and so, you know, there was a lot of burning of plastic. When I first started, let me go a step back. When I first started reporting on recycling in China in 2002, you knew you were coming to a Chinese recycling zone by the smoke on the horizon. And that's how you knew, and you could smell it. And that was the case really until about 2009, 2010. And that's when you really started seeing the first air quality protests. And those protests weren't, you know, people picketing. It was online when China had a much more robust social media environment. But that put a lot of pressure on the government, the central government. And the central government put the word out that they did not want to see unnecessary pollution beyond power plants and automobiles. They considered that necessary pollution, but burning of plastics was unnecessary. And so they really put the pressure on local governments, and the local governments started cracking down on the burning of wire. And that forced the innovation and the implementation of these kinds of systems where you actually had water separation. And so that's what drove it, was, you really saw a big cleanup of plastics then. The other point at which you've seen big cleanups of plastic processing, dirty plastics processing, is when you've had real estate pressures. In Junkyard Planet, I talk about a place called Wenan, which was, at the time, was about 3 hours from Beijing. Now you can get there in an hour, but it was one of the world's largest plastics scrap processing zone. Well, once you have a highway that brings it within an hour of Beijing, suddenly people want to develop the real estate. So they shut down that dirty burning of plastic. The actual cleanup of plastic, as we think of it, that really hasn't been on the agenda. And China isn't really at the point, at least from the point of view of the general public. And make no mistake, the general public can put a lot of pressure on the central government in China, but that pressure hasn't been there in terms of ocean plastics and some of the issues that are driving plastics cleanup in the United States. It's really been driven by air quality concerns and real estate development concerns.
Gotcha. That's great. What about Christmas tree lights being sent to cement kilns and burned for fuel with the copper being recovered after the fact?
I haven't seen it in China, but it wouldn't surprise me. One of the things that the Chinese government has been investing in for a decade now has been better incineration technology. So they've openly gone shopping in Japan in particular, and as I'm sure some of the folks listening today know, Japan is a big incinerator of trash and other recyclables that they then recover later on, and it also has some of the best technology in the world for doing so. Now, I'm not advocating either way on this, but it's better than what China had. And so they have gone and they've really been acquiring technology to do that kind of thing. And they would like to see a more concentrated waste and recycling industry. Right now, it's still very local. In some sense, you could say it's kind of where maybe waste and recycling was in the United States in the 1960s and 70s. I wouldn't, certainly private, small family owned, plus what are called TVEs, town village owned enterprises. They would like to see those things consolidated more, in part because they feel that they can then get better control of the environmental emissions associated with these things as well by having larger companies who they can interface with more directly.
I'm guessing that, there are Christmas lights that go wasted every year across the world. And so would you advocate for feeding those into kind of the global trade, or would you more advocate for kind of keeping that local and finding different ways to manage that, on the local or regional level?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'm an unapologetic advocate for markets, and I believe that the most efficient recycling is done when the people who need the raw materials most, and that right now are companies and organizations in East Asia, are able to source them and buy them and use those sustainable materials. I think an open market, recycling mandates are great, and I'm all for them in certain combinations. But I think the best thing is if there's a market there that doesn't need the recycling mandate, they just want to buy that Christmas tree light because they want that kind of copper so they can make more Christmas tree lights. I love to see local manufacturing. I love to see local recycling, but the fact of the matter is, the United States in particular is never going to manufacture as much as China and East Asia are manufacturing. They are going to need more raw materials than we are. And so I'm an advocate of seeing that stuff go where it's most wanted. And on top of that, can be used in a way that's environmentally safe and secure.
So you're using the term raw materials. What's the distinction between extracted materials?
Right,
or how
right.
do you, yeah, extracted materials.
I use them. I mean, to me, Christmas tree lights are a raw material. As a some people call them a secondary material, but let's face it. I mean, we know this. I mean, secondary copper competes with new copper. It's priced off the price of new copper. And so I love talking to really straight environmental groups, because they're totally on board. When you start talking about these things, it's like, wait, that is how we should talk about it. And so, I really want people to think in terms of, these sustainable materials compete with the new virgin materials, and let's, what can we do to help them compete better?
And so then am I also hearing you say that it's more likely that countries with kind of large manufacturing bases with tighter environmental regulations may be that extracted materials may be more available and accessible to them than economies that may have easier access to the raw materials, or may not have as easy access to those raw materials, those extracted materials. Do you know what I mean?
I don't, but I don't. I'm gonna be honest with you. But let me say this. I mean, it's, you know, it's logistics. I mean, it's crazy. You know,
Okay.
I mean, it's still cheaper to ship, you know, a shipping container full of paper from Los Angeles to Shenzhen, or Los Angeles to Kuala Lumpur, where I usually live, than it is to ship it by truck from Los Angeles to St. Louis. You know, we know the logistics of this. And so these things all get added in there. And you know, and I just want to see these sustainable raw materials go to the people who want them and can use them in a way that we can feel good about.
And so do you think that we, America, the United States, could ever achieve a China level of material recapture with our higher labor rates and our tighter environmental regulations, or do you think that we're handicapped because of those things?
I think we're able to do it, and you know, and we're able to do it. I mean, the markets are always moving, and it's not just a comparison between you know, labor costs. Of course, there's different factors that go into this. I mean, we are starting to see, you know, some of these Chinese paper makers who can't now import paper from the United States, and they would bring it to China and sort it there. They're setting up their own you know, process. They're buying mills in the United States with the idea that they're pulping mills with the idea they're going to send the pulp back to China, you know, and you know, that's really exciting. And in a sense, it's an argument that yes, we can. You know, some of the, you know, it's funny. When, you know, I grew up in a small Minneapolis scrapyard, and you know, we used to have machines that would, you know, slice a piece of cable, you know, and then you would tear it apart and pull it out, and you'd have your insulation on one side, which would go to the dump probably, and you'd have your copper on the other. And that stopped happening in the United States, you know, right around the time China really started aggressively buying in the 1990s, because the Chinese buyers would come in and they'd say, hey, we'll take the stuff just like this. And the American scrap processors would say, well, what? Fine, take it. I don't need to then pay somebody to slice it anymore. Well, that stuff did used to happen, and now it's happening again, you know, because the markets have evaporated. So, you know, in some sense, the markets do have a talent for figuring it out on their own. The important thing for me is that somebody has to want it. I mean, and we all know this. If you can put all of the recyclables in your blue bin that you want, but if there's nobody who wants to make something from it, it's trash. It's not recycling. And so the more people who want to make something from it, that means, you know, the more opportunities it has to be recyclable. And that's why I advocate for, let's try and keep these markets open as much as possible.
I have a couple questions here for you about plastics. And so, you know, one, you know, is maybe an expert opinion, but, you know, is the kind of the burning or the pyrolysis of plastics for engineered fuel, do you think that should be considered recycling?
That's a tough one. Look, my preference is always to see stuff made into new stuff. You know, I like stuff into stuff. That is my preference. But the hard facts are that sometimes there are not people out there who want to make stuff from the stuff. And so the question then becomes, what do you do with it? You know, I think we should be encouraging people to make stuff from stuff. We should be having recycling mandates to encourage people to make stuff from stuff. We should have open markets. But when you don't, then the question is what becomes the best use of that. And I am assuming that the plants are run in a safe and sustainable, secure manner. I'm perfectly okay with it, but it should not be the first, second, or third choice. Now, the follow-up to this, I know, will be, well, by setting up these plants, aren't you competing with the recycling? And that is very true. You can be. We know that. We know that incineration and waste energy can be perceived as competing with stuff into stuff. But I think if you have robust markets for making stuff from sustainable raw materials, I think that circumvents some of that. And I'm very encouraged about where things are going, especially with the technology investments that are going into plastics recycling right now. I mean, these plastics manufacturers are under so much pressure now, public pressure, and they know public opinion is tilting against their products. And public opinion does not like waste to energy when they hear it in pyrolysis. The pressure is there to figure out the technology equation of this, and I'm cautiously optimistic on the innovation side of what's going to be coming around the corner.
So I had a specific question too then about, what does a circular economy for bulk mixed plastics look like? Maybe 3 through 7s and the troublesome plastics that we're struggling with.
The answer to this, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not there yet, and we'll see. I mean, it also depends where you are. I mean, I saw I documented it. There was a very robust market for 3 through 7s in China right up into the mid 2000s. And I saw that stuff being used, and I saw that stuff being recycled, and it was purchased. The recycled plastics were purchased by some of the world's largest OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, people who make products that are, in your homes, and some of you might be using them right now. They were okay with the environmentally suspect ways that stuff was recycled. And a lot of it was coming in from North America. Japan was a major source of it. It was done. And so it can be done. The question is, can it be done in a sustainable way? I didn't feel too good about how I saw it being used in Wenan. There's a chapter in Junkyard Planet that describes it, but I was also conflicted by it, because on the other hand, I mean, part of me felt it was great, part of me, but, I was also, then after we spent several days and went on, I needed several drinks because of what I was seeing. I'm dead serious. And, the way people were suffering because of the pollution and the impacts on their health. I mean, in Wenan in the 2000s, people were having strokes in their 20s because they were working in these plastics factories and essentially plasticizing their lungs because there was no ventilation in them. So, okay, great. The 3 through 7s were being recycled into components for phones, but how do you feel about that?
Yeah, at what cost?
Yeah, and so but that doesn't have to be a permanent state of affairs. And if you go through the history of recycling, there was a lot of really nasty, dirty recycling of different things at different points in time that have been cleaned up. Automobile recycling, which is one of my favorite topics. I mean, automobile burning was was accounted for, I believe it was 5% of all ambient air pollution in the United States in 1959, setting cars on fire, because that was the only way to recover the steel and, cleanly. We don't do that anymore, So, I mean, people develop shredders and downstream sorting, and that's used in a lot of MRFs now. So, I mean, I do think the history of recycling shows us that there is hope for innovation. And maybe we can find a route from the way China did those 3 through 7s into a more circular means of doing them in a way that we can all feel relatively good about.
Say more about automobiles. Your first book had what I thought was a really interesting stat that I'd like you to reveal about the fact that we had them, and at some point we got through the stock.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So automobile recycling is a really interesting and forgotten environmental problem. In the 1960s, it was regularly cited as, one of the key environmental issues in the United States. There were, in New York City alone, I saw this figure the other day, I'd used it in the book, but in 1969, there were 20,000 cars dumped on the streets of New York City alone, just dumped, because there was no recycling option. You had to pay to get them recycled. Sound familiar? Now, by the early 1960s, technology had been developed to figure that out, and it was the automobile shredder. But that was the early 1960s, and then you had downstream recycling added on in the 70s. It wasn't until 2008 that the backlog of cars littering the American countryside was actually cleaned up. it took that long. And the reason it took till 2008 was, if people who are in the metal business may recall this, the metal, I mean, we were almost at $1,000 a ton for scrap steel in 2008 before the market crash. The market incentive was there to pull that stuff out, led by the fact that we had these automobile shredders and the technology. But it took a very, very long time for all of that backlog to get cleaned out. So to me, that's a very, you know, it's an optimistic story. It's a cautionary story. I mean, because we're all thinking about plastics these days. And certainly it doesn't mean that plastics are going to go the same way, but it does show that, you know, once the raw material is located, there is the incentive to fix it, you know, to use it, but it can take a long time to clean up that accumulation of consumer stuff that didn't have a use previously.
And, you know, and I think the interesting part of automobiles is that we kept them in junkyards, whereas the material that we're talking about today, you know, plastics and paper and glass, is really, if we don't capture it, it's entombed in landfills.
Right.
How do you feel about accessing landfills?
Well, actually, it's interesting because the automobile problem wasn't just junkyards. I mean, the automobile problem was wild areas, wilderness areas. Yeah. People would dump them in the woods. This was regularly cited. Lady Bird Johnson's, you know, beautification campaign, you know, clean up American highways. That was largely about automobiles being dumped by the sides of roads. And there are pictures of this that you can see, very famous pictures of you know, cars in, you know, in beautiful parts of natural Utah, you know, these glorious parts of our national parks, and people would just tow them out there and dump them because it was cheaper to do that than it was to pay for them to be recycled. So you know, it is an interesting analog. Now, your question was just.
What do we do with the stuff that we've put in landfills? If
landfill,
where our house.
Yeah, I mean, landfill mining, it has happened. You know, Huron Valley Steel, which is actually based there in Michigan. Some of you might know it. They're one of the most innovative recycling companies in history. They were the ones who really developed how to take the metals that are coming out of an automobile shredder and sort them using specific gravities, light. They've developed incredible technology, some of which are used in MRFs, and you may not even know Huron Valley Steel Company developed them. Well, when metal prices went crazy in the 2000s, they were actually hired in a couple of cases to go to landfills where metal had been dumped. You know, when it wasn't sorted, nobody had the technology to sort it affordably. They were hired to go into these dumps, dig them up, and sort the metals out of there, and they did it for profit. So again, I think, you know, I think mining, you know, if the economic incentive is there to do it, and it was for non-ferrous metals in the 2000s, why not? I think, but I don't, obviously the economic incentives aren't there right now.
Gotcha. Let's see, we've got a few minutes left, but you know, in the spirit of honoring the sponsor of your talk today, Goodwill, and you know, the focus on, you know, your latest book, Secondhand Travels in the New Global Garage Sale, can you give us a cool story about you know, Goodwill or these charity organizations? We have definitely seen a lot more kind of resale shops pop up around this country. You know, what's an interesting story you could share from that?
Well, I think, to me, one of the coolest things about Goodwill, and there's a lot of cool things about Goodwill, I really admire the organization, but I think one of the things that really impressed me spending time around the Goodwill of Southern Arizona, where I reported, you know, I basically embedded there for weeks at a time to learn how thrift store works. And that's a federation. Goodwill, just so you know, there's about 140 Goodwill federations across the United States and Canada, and they all have their own territory. So you have the one up there, the Grand Rapids one, but the one I spent time with was in Southern Arizona. And one of the really interesting things to me was how it is a laboratory for generating small businesses. And the number of businesses that are started out of Goodwills by people going into them, finding stuff that maybe they want to mark up, you know, flip onto eBay, stuff that they buy in Goodwill and make into other products. And then what I was most excited by, because this is my area, the amount of international trade that takes place out of Goodwills. Now, Goodwill of Southern Arizona is in a very opportune location. It's just across the border from Mexico, obviously. You know, all of its stores are, you know, within about an hour of of Mexico. And so, and most of its customers are from Mexico. They drive up, and many of them drive up multiple times a day, basically case the stores one by one, buy what's just been dropped off, and bring it back down to Mexico, sell to wholesalers down in Mexico, who then, basically those wholesalers bring these goods that are on, on the shelves at Goodwill and put them into secondhand shops throughout Mexico, which for many consumers down there are new shops. That's where they get their stuff. And that's a really sort of unwritten story, I'd like to think, before I did it, about how Goodwill works and how it, we think of Goodwill improving lives because it pays for job training, but it also gives people who can't, in developing countries, access to consumer goods that they would not be able to afford or have access to new. And so to me, that's not a specific anecdote, but it's really exciting. And here in Minnesota, obviously, it's not affordable for, people to drive. The logistics are just too crazy. You don't drive up from Mexico, load up stuff in, St. Paul and then drive it back down. But you do have other kinds of traders. Here in Minnesota, for example, we have a very large Somali community, and that Somali community will shop the Goodwills. They'll look for stuff that then is packed into shipping containers and sent to Somalia. And again, Goodwill knows it's going on. They know they're important consumers there, but it's kind of this hidden market. And I just find it so exciting and in many ways heartwarming, because it's starting a business. There's folks who make a living at that, and it gives people in Somalia access to consumer goods they wouldn't otherwise be able to access.
That's right. That's right. That's great. One last question, I think, and that is the future question. You have a wide breadth of experience. You're reporting on the news of the day every day. What do you see in front of us where recycling is concerned, or where development of the circular economy is concerned? What can we do? How can we continue to move things forward?
Yeah, well, again, one of the things I really encourage people to do is, because I've just seen it be effective, is, talk about recycling, talk about sustainability, but talk about raw materials, and I can't hit that enough, because it matters so much to governments and it matters so much to consumers, but I've seen it really, it gains traction, it really helps you gain traction with, with the types of officials, whether it be in the United States or otherwise, who would ordinarily look askance at something like recycling. That's something environmentalists do. Well, sure it is, but, buying raw materials is something that a manufacturer does, and that's a way to really, sort of hit these folks in a different way. And so I really encourage people to think about that. And I think that's why the recycling mandate conversation is really exciting, because yes, it is a recycling mandate, but it's an opportunity to make that argument. And I have seen in my own experience, especially not so much in the United States, though it's happening in California, but in other places, you see it happening in China, you see it happening in Malaysia, where public officials are starting to grasp that, these are raw materials. This is not waste. They also grasp that, and this is a hard argument for people in the industry to make sometimes, but to say, look, recycling isn't green heaven. You don't put something in a blue bin and little green fairies magically transform it into sustainable products. It's an industrial process, and it does use energy, it does use water, but it uses less energy and less water, and it doesn't leave giant holes in the ground that will take millions of years to fill. And that's potent. Being able to acknowledge what we are, that, I say we, I grew up in this industry. It paid for me to go to college, that we compete in a better way against these other raw material processes. I believe that regulators and politicians around the world are starting to get that. And I think that's really, really positive for the industry.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, I don't see any other questions. It's probably a good time to say thank you very much, Adam, for being with us today. Adam was supposed to be with us, back in May, and life was interrupted for this COVID, but the work doesn't stop. And so, thank you for your continual reporting and your work on this. You're providing us with a really important perspective that we need to carry with us, honestly. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Karen, and best wishes to everybody on a great conference. And like I said, I just love, the state recycling organizations, and I wish I could have been there with you in person. I was really looking forward to it, but who knows, maybe down the line.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much.